Hey guys, welcome back to another drawing tutorial with me, Miss Birds. Today we are going to be looking at using some of our value shading techniques. So in our previous classes, we've talked about value, the importance of value, how it can make things really look very realistic. And so we are going to be using those techniques to create a sphere. Now, a sphere or a ball, something that's going to look like a rounded three-dimensional object. If we were to just have a circle, it would be very flat. And so what we want to do is we want to use our different value shades, right? Our different values to create something that looks very three-dimensional. And so we're going to be doing that by using a sheet of paper. I didn't use a full sheet of paper. I just kind of grabbed a half sheet. That will work fine. You're going to need a pencil with some type of eraser at the top, or if you have a separate eraser, that's fine. You may want to also shade in your sphere and kind of blend it a little bit more when you're using your values. And so there's a couple ways you can do this. One way is you can use your finger, which is pretty common. The reason why I suggest not using your finger is just because we typically have a lot of oils on our hands that we don't necessarily always notice are there. And so when we take our finger and we're kind of rubbing it against our paper, sometimes that oil will rub up on the paper and it kind of creates almost like this streakiness or a point to where you can actually see the prints of your fingers in there. And so you don't necessarily really want that. So I would suggest not really using it. If you can use something like a piece of newspaper or even a little paper towel will help to kind of smooth or blend those values. Also, if you have a stump, this is a drawing stump, and it is also used to blend out some of our shades. Not everybody will have them, but if you see in this tutorial that you think this is something that you might be interested in using, they have them available anywhere from Michael's to Walmart to any place where they sell any type of drawing materials. You'll normally find them. It's really just a rolled up piece of paper, and the paper helps to kind of smooth out the graphite on your paper that you're drawing. So let's go ahead and get started. We're going to get started just by drawing a circle. Okay, and so I'm going to take my hand and kind of just move it into the motion of a circle. Notice I'm not actually putting anything down on my paper yet. I want to get my arm nice and into the groove. And once I feel like I have a nice steady rhythm going, then I'm going to put my pencil down to create my circle. Now, it's not exactly perfect, and it may be a little bit lighter on the screen. So what I'm going to do is go ahead and kind of darken some of those edges just so you can see. Remember, whenever we're drawing, we always want to draw light until we get it right, and then go darker or trace with a marker. So I'm going to keep my circle fairly light because I don't really want to see the edges of my circle. I want to create those edges by using values. Now, before when we talked about shading, we talked about a very important tidbit or a little bit of information about shading, which is wherever your light source is coming in, your shadow should be opposite of that. So if I have my light source, I'm just going to use an abbreviation LS. If my light source is coming this way, that means all of my really dark values and my shadows should be on the opposite side. If my light source is coming from this side, then it's going to be the opposite, right? All of my shadows and shadows and really dark shades will be on the opposite side. So what I'm going to do for the point of this demonstration is I'm just going to keep my light source on the left-hand side, which means all of my darker values and my shadows are going to be on the right. Now, it doesn't matter whether you want to try this with your light source on this side of the paper or on the opposite side of the paper. It is completely up to you. It's fine. So we're going to go ahead and start, and I always like to start with my darker values at the bottom and then kind of go towards the top of where my light source is. So if my light source is shining down here, that means the lightest part of my sphere is going to be right in this section here. Now, I don't want to necessarily go through and leave those lines there because we want to give the illusion that light is hitting the sphere. And the way that we do that is by making really soft blends and transitions between those values. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to start moving my pencil around, and notice that I am putting in a little bit of value, but it's still matching the shape of the object. So this is a rounded shape. It's a sphere, right? And so because of that, I don't want to just go up and down like vertically or horizontally with my pencil, because that's not going to match the shape of the object. So if this is a rounded object, then all of the shadows and the values should also be round. If we were working with a square or something that's more of like a rectangular or a triangular shape, then the edges of the shadows are going to be a lot more straight. And so you have to make sure that you're paying attention to the object that you are trying to draw. So I'm just going to put in a little bit of value, and as I get closer to the top, my value is going to change, right? It's going to get lighter and lighter until it gets to that highlight, that area where the light source is hitting. So I'm just going to go through and create some more value down here at the bottom. Remember, we can create darker values by pushing down and applying pressure to our pencil. And if we want to create lighter values or mid-tone values, we just want to take pressure off of our pencil. One of the things that I always like to consider is that it's a lot easier to add more value to something, to make something look darker by adding pencil, than it is by doing something too dark and then trying to erase it, right? If you draw too dark, you're not going to be able to erase anything, and you're just going to see the lines underneath, which is not very good. So I've put some value down. This is where you can start kind of like blending your values, blending your graphite. Now I'm just using this piece of paper for now, just so you can see it's like part of a paper towel. Just a small bit, you don't need a whole lot. But you can see this area down here is a little bit darker, and as it's slowly going up, it's getting lighter and lighter. So I haven't even really touched the very top of the sphere yet. I do want it to be a little bit darker. So the shadow down here, or I should say the shading down here at the bottom of the sphere, that's going to be what's called our core shadow, because it is the main shadow that we see in our object. So it should always be the darkest area. And again, I'm kind of following just that same shape of the sphere and just adding in more and more value. I can go in with my stump so you can kind of see what that looks like. Now, right now I'm getting some good values. I'm getting some darker values at the bottom where that core shadow is. And then I'm slowly bringing those shadows up to create those nice mid-tones. It's starting to look a little bit uneven to me. It doesn't really look like it has a smooth transition. I have these really, really dark values, and then it kind of just goes really light. And so what I'm going to do is just add in a little bit more value in those areas. Just a little bit, to kind of break up that transition and make it a little bit smoother. Now, when you're adding values, you don't even necessarily have to blend them. If you just kind of wanted to leave it the line work of the pencil, you could do that, right? I could create lines that are darker because I'm pushing down onto the pencil. If I put my lines closer together, it's automatically going to create a darker value. And I'm just going to keep adding in wherever I can to ensure that I have a nice smooth transition. So the thing about shading is we always want a nice, smooth, easy, gradual transition. We don't want to see our darkest value right next to our lightest value because it's not going to look very realistic. So we're practicing a lot of skill here. First, we practice how to apply pressure and take pressure off of our pencil in order to create those different values, create those midtones, create those dark values, create those light values. And now we're really practicing the skill of making them gradually change one into the other. Nice smooth transitions. I can take a little bit of value, just very lightly sketching onto my paper. around where my light source would be hitting. So I'm going to keep the area where my light source is hitting that sphere. I'm going to keep it the white of the paper. I don't want to add any value there. I want to keep it nice and light because that will be our highlight, right? We talked about highlight a little bit when we did our Nearpod activity. So I'm really just adding in value wherever I see it needs to be. One of the tricks that we talked about beforehand is if you kind of squint your eyes, at your paper and you see a difference between your dark values going into your lighter values, then you're probably doing a very good job. If you're squinting at your paper and you kind of only see really dark values or really light values, then it means that you need some more transition in between those values. So you need to add in some more pencil to make some areas darker, or you need to add less pencil in certain areas so that you also can see your lighter values. So I'm going to add in a little bit of darkness down here, again on my core shadow, pushing down a little bit harder on the pencil to get those really dark values, and then taking pressure off of my pencil as I move up towards where my highlight is. Remember, we want to stay consistent with the shape, so I'm moving my pencil in a way that moves around the shape of the sphere. And again, I can go in with my paper towel or my stump. I'm going to use my paper towel for this one and just kind of blend out the values together. Again, I want to make sure that my highlight stays the white of the paper. Our highlight is always going to be our lightest area. And as we start blending our values a little bit more and start creating that transition, you'll notice that your circle is starting to look a lot more three-dimensional. And you can continually go in and add more value wherever you see fit. What I'm going to do is I'm going to start working on my cast shadow. Now our cast shadow is that little shadow that comes behind you, like if you're outside in the sunshine and you see a shadow, your shadow's following you around. That's what we call a cast shadow. So again, wherever the light source is coming from, our cast shadow is going to be on the opposite side. I want to make sure that my shadow matches the shape of my object. So this should have a little bit of rounded quality to it. And just a tiny bit on the opposite side. Now your cast shadow should still be more of like a mid-tone. It's not going to be a light value, but it's also not going to be your darkest value. Remember, your core shadow is going to be your darkest. But we do want to have a little bit of a cast shadow because that's what's going to make it look like it's sitting on top of something. I'm going to go in and add a little bit more value so it looks a little bit darker at the bottom there. And again, remember, this is a lot of practice for us. We want to learn how to use the technique of value, how to create values using that taking pressure on, taking pressure off technique. But we also want to learn how to just use values together, how to get better at placing the values, at creating a nice gradual change in our value. Now, I want you to keep working on your sphere until it comes out to your liking. Remember, we want to see multiple values here. We want to see a very light value, lighter values at the top as well. As we come down towards our shadows, we want to see some nice mid-tone areas. We want to see our dark values for our core shadow. We also want to see a little bit of a cast shadow as well too. That will really give the illusion of the three-dimensionality of that shape or object. And again, we also want to make sure that we are practicing those smooth transitions. And there you go. That is how you can use some of your values to create a three-dimensional object. Today we worked with a sphere, but you can really use this technique for any object. Just remember, wherever your light source is coming in, your shadows are always going to be the opposite, right? Your cast shadow, your core shadow are all going to be on the opposite side of where the light source is. So again, if I put my light source on the opposite side, then all of my darker areas would be here and my cast shadow would be going this way.